Hello, 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 and welcome to the Sprinklr Coffee Club. I'm Marshall Kirkpatrick, your host here at the Sprinklr Coffee Club. Thanks so much for joining us. I want to encourage you to pour yourself a cup of coffee or whatever your beverage of choice is today for an exciting conversation. This one is going to be mind-expanding. It's going to be inspiring. I am so excited about it. Our guest today is a innovative social media marketer that I've had the benefit of working with myself very closely in the past in marketing, customer care, sales, much more. Today, he is the director of marketing at one of the most thought-provoking, intriguing startups out on the web. I want to introduce to you the director of marketing at Hypothesis, Nate Angell. Hello, Nate. Oh, thanks so much for joining us, Nate. Can we hear you? I think we've got your audio now.
Okay. I certainly hope so, because I've got a lot to say today.
That's the spirit, Nate. That is the spirit. I am so glad to have Nate here on the phone today. Those of you who are familiar with my professional history know that prior to joining Sprinklr, I was the founder of a startup called Little Bird, where we discovered thought leaders and influencers across any sector. And I was honored to get to build that company with Nate Angell, who played a number of really important roles. We got to know each other and collaborate closely there. And now here our paths cross again. And Nate has a really cool job these days. Hypothesis is a company that does web annotation. It's been around for a little while. It was started by some of the real trailblazers on the web, and I'm excited to hear a little bit about it. Nate, will you tell us, what is this company Hypothesis that you work at today?
Yeah, Marshall. Well, first of all, I want to thank you, because it was an article that you wrote in Read Write Web way back in an earlier chapter of your life that first introduced me to Hypothesis. I think it was in 2011. And so I first learned about it through you, which is funny how the world turns, right? And here I am working for them. So Hypothesis is a little bit of a unique organization, because it's actually a nonprofit organization that makes a set of fully openly licensed software that enables people to take notes on the web. And when I say on the web, I mean any digital document like HTML, web page, PDF, or EPUB. And this site, people have different understandings of annotation, but it actually goes way back, into deep history, where you think of monks scribbling on the sides of ancient manuscripts is a form of annotation, or what maybe many of us who were willing to do that to our books would do in school, when we would write in the margins or underline passages. All that is annotation. But what's really interesting and different about Hypothesis is it enables that activity of annotation on the margins of digital documents on the web, but also in a social manner, so that we can have conversations together with other people on top of documents on the web. And so it becomes a kind of a way to have a conversation in the margins on top of any web page. Here right now, I think we're showing up the Get Started page for Hypothesis. So anyone can come to this page at hypothesis/start to sign up for a free account and annotate on their own.
That's beautiful. Talk about making the web social, huh? So now folks are out doing annotation for themselves, presumably, but in a networked public fashion. Is that a fair way to characterize it?
Yeah, and that's one of the ways that it happens, is that there are multiple layers of annotation enabled by Hypothesis. So one of them is a fully public layer that enables anyone with a Hypothesis account, well, anyone to go read annotations on a document that's been annotated, and anyone with a Hypothesis account to contribute to that conversation and make annotations of their own. There's also the possibility for private annotation in groups or alone. So for instance, in the context of like a book club or a research group or a group of investigative journalists or a class in a university or high school, for example, A group of people might annotate privately so that they're looking at the document together and they can see each other's annotations and comment on them, but other people aren't able to view their work. So it's in a kind of private social atmosphere.
Very cool. Very cool. So folks, as you hear about this and as we dive into Nate's thoughts on marketing and social media in general, if you have questions that you would like to ask Nate or thoughts to contribute to the conversation, we want to invite you to do so over in the right-hand sidebar of the YouTube video. There's a little chat window, and go ahead and place your questions there, and our fabulous producer Eric will grab them and share them with Nate and I. So Nate, it's been almost 10 years that since I have been feeling really inspired by this company that you're working for. What kinds of communities are using the product?
Well, by and large, the largest use case right now is in teaching and learning, and that's primarily higher education, although some K-12 use mostly in high schools. And it makes sense, right? Because classrooms are groups of people that are usually reading something together already, and they may not be sharing it in a social way that annotation enables, but annotation actually enables them to do what we call social reading together. And so they're able to, like if you're a college professor and you assign that new translation of the Odyssey, which I'm reading right now, you could actually have the students in your course conduct a conversation together in the margins of the Odyssey that would enable them to both kind of explore their understandings with each other in a social kind of discussive way, but also interact with you, the instructor, and even invited experts. So you see a lot of groups using it where they'll actually invite the author of a piece to come in and annotate their own work with groups of other people like students in order to kind of take the conversation about the reading to another level. There's a couple other groups that use it. It's widely used in journalism. So you can imagine when there are public documents on the web, like, say, a major speech by a political figure that might be coming up, or any kinds of investigative document troves that have been uncovered. Journalists can use this in order to go through those materials and either publicly or privately annotate them in order to fact check, develop storylines, etc. So journalism is another big area, and then obviously science and research. So it really comes down to anybody who's reading and wants to either make notes on their reading for themselves in a way that enables them to come back to those notes in a kind of consistent way, or anybody who's reading something and wants to read that work in conjunction with other people can find value. So if you're a person who's going across the internet reading stuff, like I think we all are, and you want to put a bookmark not just to a page, but to a particular passage on a page and add your own note to it, that's where it can really become powerful and handy, and whether you do that privately or in a social context.
And in my mind, I'm picturing sort of a Kindle highlights for the open web. Is that a fair analogy to draw?
Yeah, it's much like the capabilities inside Kindle, but I think one of the things about the Kindle annotation capability is it's really siloed inside Kindle, right? You can only use that annotation capability for text that you have inside Kindle, and they're only visible and accessible within the Kindle environment. And one thing about Hypothesis is that it sits outside those silos, right? In fact, we worked with the W3C, the standards body of the World Wide Web, in order to establish a new web annotation standard that we're hoping that organizations like Amazon and Kindle would eventually conform to too, so that all of us annotators can have a kind of common ecosystem of annotation, if you will. And that's what we'd really like to see, rather than having some annotations scrolled away over in this silo and other annotations scrolled away over there that can't talk to each other or see each other.
Fantastic. And who do you sell the software to? Who are your customers? Is it institutions, individuals?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so like I was saying, we're a nonprofit organization, but of course, as a nonprofit, we also have sustainability in mind. We want to we want to be around. The software itself, we don't really sell. It's available under a permissive open source license on GitHub, and you go to the website there, you'll find a link to the developers area. You can access the software yourself. And so there are people out there who run the software on their own. What we do offer, though, is an implementation of Hypothesis that anyone can use for free as an individual. And also organizations that use Hypothesis at scale, we work with them as partners, and that's where money changes hands. So we're essentially a business-to-business organization rather than a business-to-consumer organization, because although individuals can certainly use the free software capabilities that we offer, it's with institutions that we have actual business relationships where they contribute to the sustainability of the project. Right now, most of those, most of those business arrangements are with colleges and universities, K through 12 school districts, or major publishers who want to add annotation layers to their published works.
Very cool. So tell us how you're marketing this. What are you bringing to the marketing efforts?
Well, there's a couple of different things, and I'm just kudos to you, because a lot of the things that I learned about marketing, I either learned from you or alongside you in the work that we've done. And so I appreciate being able to come back and report on how that's flowered out in the real world, even though we were also working in the real world before, of course. But there's a couple different things. Hypothesis, we don't have a huge marketing budget, but there's a couple things that we do that I think are kind of crucial for people who are trying to work at scale in the internet age, for lack of a better term. One of those is implementing marketing automation, and I can say more about that. The other thing that I think has been really important and crucial for Hypothesis is to make sure that we're developing an authentic relationship to the community of our users. And right now we're really focused on the educational use case there, the teaching and learning use case. And I could talk more about how we go about that. And then the other thing is really about more social media, and there's two sides to that. One is, as you pointed out, Hypothesis itself and annotation can be a kind of social media platform in a sense, but we're also very deeply embedded in Twitter, as I know you are, and I personally am as well. And we find Twitter to be an incredibly rich sort of channel to be just marketing and just engaging in general in that authentic way with our community, like what I was mentioning before.
That's great. I definitely want to hear about that. Let's start with the second one, though. Let's talk about building that authentic relationship with your community of users. What have you done around that? What have you found works really well? What kind of wisdom can you offer others who would strive to build a more authentic relationship with their community of users?
Yeah, that's a great place to start, I think, because it may sound sort of redundant, but I think the most important ingredient in being authentic is, of course, to actually be authentic. And so you have to, you can't mount an authentic play. I don't think that ever works really. And so I think the first secret is to find in what arena does your organization or your offering or your product, in what arena is it actually authentic, and in what arena do you actually have an authenticity that you can bring to that community that the community will actually appreciate. And as I was saying, that education and teaching and learning is the area that we're of the highest use of annotation right now for Hypothesis. That's an area that we really are dedicated to. I mean, not just as an organization, but personally, I would say everyone on the team has a kind of deep personal engagement with education as a valuable practice. And so it's easy for us then as team members and as an organization to turn that personal, authentic relationship to that sector, if you will, into something we do as an organization. So I would say that identifying and finding the heart of your authenticity is one of the crucial parts of that kind of marketing dynamic. And then the second thing is then what to do with it and develop it once you've identified where it is. And in what we're doing at Hypothesis right now is we've started a community that we call Annotate Ed, for annotation in education. And this is a group of people who represent institutions that are doing deep work in annotation. And those are mostly colleges and universities. And what we're trying to do with that group is help them take their interest in annotation a step further. And sure, it's related to our product, it's related to the work that we do as an organization, but it's actually related even more deeply to what they're trying to accomplish through the means of using the Hypothesis annotation product. And so that includes things like research into the impact and efficacy of annotation in teaching and learning. Like, does it actually help students to annotate as they read and they move through text, as an example? And so another thing I'll just say, just kind of pulling it out of the marketer's bag of tricks there, rather than spending a whole bunch of money buying booths at conferences and things like that, what we try to do is organize, I'll use the word authentic again, authentic meetings that are adjacent to important conferences in our sector. So there's a few conferences that are very important in the teaching and learning education world. And what we try to do is organize Annotate Ed gatherings that are adjacent to those conferences, sometimes very much in conjunction with the conference, sometimes a little bit to the side in a kind of guerrilla marketing way. But rather than trying to constantly bring people together for our own purposes, we try to go to where they already are gathered and bring an authentic engagement there that they really care about to that event.
That's very cool. Can you give us an example of an Annotate Ed event that was adjacent to an industry conference, and what kind of content you brought to that event?
Yeah, so we've actually been having a really rich partnership with an organization called the Online Learning Consortium. Might not be familiar to folks outside the education space, but this is a very large organization of folks who are focused on, digital learning or learning through the means of digital technologies. They have two big conferences a year: Innovate in the spring, fall, and we participated in those events a couple of different ways. Last spring at Innovate in Denver, we held an Annotate Ed summit on that first sort of pre-conference day, during the pre-conference day that they had at the conference, that a lot of conferences have, and it was part of the official program and so forth. And during that event, we brought together both face-to-face and virtual participants who were working in institutions focused on annotation, or who were annotation curious, working in institutions that were kind of interested in what was going on with this annotation thing that they've been hearing about. And one of the most powerful pieces of video that I've ever had a part in at all was captured at that event last spring at Annotated at OLC Innovate, which was a mini keynote. We called it. It's like a 20-minute talk by a professor at the University of Colorado, Denver, named Manuel Espinosa. And Manuel is working with a team of undergraduate students to on a kind of project-based learning effort to enshrine education as a basic human right in the Colorado State Constitution. And I said I was going to get emotional during this talk, but I actually kind of tear up whenever I think about this talk, because there's no better example I've ever seen of an educational activity that both enabled students to learn in very deep ways and also enabled them to have to work on something that might have a real effect on the world, a really profound, important effect in the world. And that, to me, is the secret of good education. So we were very privileged to have Manuel speak at one of our events. it created a piece of collateral that, talks about annotation and how they use it, but is really goes so far beyond our product into a real world use case that I don't think there's a better advertisement for what could be done with annotation and hypothesis.
That's beautiful. Yeah,
there are other examples too, but
go ahead. Yeah, please.
I don't want to go into all of them.
Well, I think that many of us, especially in the marketing technology space, have an interest in using our own technology to help market our company, and this seems like you've got a series of examples of your version of doing that.
Yeah, and I mean, not every product has the luxury of being a tool that can sort of market itself in the same way, that where it's a tool that you can use in getting the word out as much as something to get the word out about. And so Hypothesis, much like Sprinklr, I guess, is a tool that can be used in order to talk about itself in a kind of meta way. And part of that is, and we haven't done this as well or as powerfully as we might, but is to build the abilities to have the tool become a viral marketing kind of engine into the tool itself. It is possible to share annotations, for instance, public annotations out in other channels, like on social media, on Twitter, in Facebook, or in email, on web pages and things like that. But we don't, partially because we're really respecting the way that our users, they don't always want their material to be constantly shared out in public ways, right? So it's a kind of thing that a user has to take an action to do. So we haven't built it in as an automatic kind of viral marketing play, but nevertheless, people do share out annotations that they find to be particularly interesting and worthy in other social media networks. And so Hypothesis ends up being a kind of, a seed of its own growth in that sense, because people who don't know about annotation, don't know about Hypothesis, are reading a social media thread by somebody who actually cares deeply about something, and they've embedded a Hypothesis annotation in their social feed, and that leads those people into an authentic engagement with Hypothesis. So it can be an incredibly powerful tool, but I would say that we haven't abused it as such, and I think that's a good thing, and I don't think we will. So they're striking that balance between, turning your product into its own marketing engine and enabling your product to be used authentically in its own marketing. I got sort of meta, so it's hard to talk about. Sure.
Yeah, that's good. I want to talk about social media, but I feel like there's some more depth I want to go on with you around the value of annotation. Why should I annotate content? What's in it for the annotator? What is that, the power of annotation? What does it look like?
So I think there's a level on which it's incredibly powerful for an individual, and then there's a way that it's powerful for organizations, and they're a little bit different. So just in the individual case first, right? Like I was saying before, when you annotate, whether you do it privately or publicly, what you're essentially doing is making bookmarks to very specific parts of the internet, right? A passage, a sentence, a paragraph, a key point in a document, and you're bookmarking that for your own later use in your own notebook that travels with you. So you can always get back to that document. You can review the thought or notes or tags that you made on top of that anchor when you make it, that bookmark when you make it. And so just on the individual level, annotation operates as a kind of a way to record your reading experience across the web and access it again in really useful ways. And I mean, this is all stuff that comes right out of the Marshall Kirkpatrick playbook, right? where you actually, when you bring information into your mind, you try to bring it in a way that you can access it again later. And Hypothesis really assists with that, in the sense that I now have this collection of very granular links to readings I've made on the internet and what I thought about them at the time, that can also spark off social conversations, which is sort of a gravy and an added benefit on top of that. We had a user, a woman named Heather Staines, who used to work with us here at Hypothesis and now works in a different organization, but she has just made her 100,000th annotation. So she, as far as we know, she's the human with the most annotations to her name. There are actually some robots that have made more, and we could talk about that. We could talk about robot annotation later, which is a really interesting topic as well. But this Heather now has this notebook of 100,000 annotations. That's an incredibly rich record of all the reading that she's done across the web. That's the individual use case. Now, the organizational use case is a little bit different, and I could go into that, but let me pause and just see if you wanted to follow up there.
I want to hear about robot annotation for sure.
I figured you would.
That's a beautiful story about individual annotation, but please do. I mean, either before or after the organizational story, I definitely want to hear what the robots are doing.
Yeah, well, and what the robots are doing is really, really cool and powerful. So just quickly on the organizational side, I would say that for organizations, the two big use cases are if you have a group of people that are reading text together and trying to do things with them, then annotation can be a really powerful tool. I mean, we've maybe all worked with, Google Docs and comments, or Word track changes, God forbid, working collaboratively on documents. What this enables you to do is bring that same functionality to any document, even one that you're not authoring yourself, and work on it together, either in a public or a private context. That can be really powerful if you're a researcher, a journalist, whatever. The other thing, the flip side of that, though, is publishers can enable annotation on their publications as a sort of like the way that comments can be enabled, as a way to enable reader engagement on top of their publications. And there's a whole nest of worms around comments and whether or not they're a good idea, and enabling people to comment on your materials and so forth. And we could get into that conversation, but we may not have time to dive all the way to the bottom of it, but it can be incredibly powerful. Jumping to the robots, and I'll just throw up here really quickly. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but there's the robot librarian that we used to talk about back in the Little Bird days, that I still have on my phone case that my daughter drew for me. So you and I are both big fans of robots. The most interesting robot use case we have for annotation right now is in science. And you may not know this, as I didn't, but when people publish scientific articles, especially in like biology, for example, every ingredient that they use in their experiments has a unique identifier. This mouse with this particular genetic makeup, this test tube, et cetera, all these things have unique identifiers. So when I publish a paper, I actually embed in that paper a list of those unique identifiers. These are the mice that I used in my experiment. There is a robot called Cybot that goes around looking for scientific papers that have these embedded identifiers in them. And it says, aha, I found a paper that uses this particular mouse. I'm going to now add an annotation to that paper right there where it says it's using the mouse. And I'm going to provide a link to every other research paper that I've found that uses the same mouse in research. And so this robot is kind of going around the web, uncovering perhaps unknown connections between different pieces of scientific research and surfacing them to authors and readers, actually. So that's a really interesting robot use case, but there's a million more along that same kind of model that I'm sure you could imagine, because I know how you like to imagine those things.
I do like to imagine. I like to imagine that record in particular being in the Museum of Vivisection History in the glorious future when we don't do experiments on mice. Wow, yeah, that's fascinating to think about. Well, Nate, we need to talk more often. I feel like we haven't had a chance to get into the incredible power that you have drawn from Twitter and social media, and so much more. Do you want to conclude with any thoughts on words of advice for people who would aspire uh, to build value on Twitter and social media?
Yeah, I would. I mean, and again, I credit you for a lot of what I've learned on Twitter. But I'll just say really briefly two things. One, I go back to the authenticity that I was talking about before in marketing, and I think that being authentic in social platforms is the best road to success. And when it comes to a brand being authentic in a space like Twitter or other platforms, part of that is by helping to enable the voices of your team interact in that stream rather than just repeating out the brand's message over and over again from some sort of generic account. I mean, we can't all be Mr. Peanut, right? We can't all have the charisma and notoriety that Mr. Peanut has. Not every brand has that. But we do all have teams of interesting people, and to amplify their voices through the brand account can be, I think, really powerful. And the other thing I'll just say is Twitter lists are underappreciated.
Hallelujah.
Use Twitter lists.
Twitter lists for the win. It's a beautiful note to finish this episode out on, Nate. Speaking of Twitter, I want to invite everybody to connect with us all here on social media. You can like and subscribe to the Sprinklr YouTube channel to get all the Coffee Club episodes in your YouTube inbox, and you can connect with Nate out on Twitter. I know I sure love to, and lots of other folks do too as well, at Xolotl, XOLOTOL.
TL.
So Nate, TL, yes. There we go. XOLOTL. Nate, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been a real pleasure to speak with you as always, and we wish you and the team at Hypothesis all the world of success.
Thank you so much, Marshall. It's been a real pleasure and honor to talk with you. And yes, we should do it more often. I think we live in the same city, don't we?
We sure do. All right. Well, thanks everybody so much for joining us here on this virtual chat. Sorry you can't join us for all of our in-person chats, but we really appreciate you joining us here at Sprinklr Coffee Club. I know I feel smarter as a result of this conversation. I hope you do too. And we will see you next time. Take care, everybody.